Okay. Actually, I probably do something a bit different from what I thought I was going to do, just because of the other presentations. But first of all, I want to thank, Elena and all those who have organized this event for having invited me. It's really a great pleasure to be here. And it's also a great pleasure to be in a discussion on social reproduction and value creation, because for a long, long time, the issue of social reproduction was really ignored. We raised, discussed, politicized around this issue for many, many years in the 70s and beyond. But, in most of the feminist movement and academic world as well, I think social reproduction for a long time fell out of the spectrum of interesting issues. And so it's important to see, and I think I want to reflect in the course of my presentation also why it is coming back at this time. I suspect that it's coming back because of the immense crisis that is taking place today on this terrain, and also because the promises that in feminist theory, in feminist politics, working outside the home, entering wage labor, entering male-dominated domains, have proven not to be as founded, as it was imagined. And so now we're confronting back an old issue, I think. And I want to say right away that the issue of value creation is a political issue, first of all. It's not only a technical issue to figure out how capitalism is in fact being able to accumulate its wealth, which is extremely important, if you want to disengage the mechanism that the capitalist class uses in order to perpetuate its power. If you are moving within a belief, a project that goes beyond capitalism, then it's very important to know how this accumulation, although I would say that the accumulation of value cannot also be disconnected from the political instruments. For example, the creation of division, the continuous accumulation of division among people. One of the themes of my work, and I'm not alone, has been that capitalism not only accumulates wealth, private wealth, but also accumulates hierarchies, accumulates division, and the accumulation of this division is not something that can be separated from the production of value, from the accumulation of value, because without this division it would not have been possible, undoubtedly, for the capitalist class to perpetuate its power, to this day. So the issue of value creation is an important political issue. And I don't believe that it's less important today than it was in the past. I think it very much depends on what language one uses, for example, what language one uses. I campaigned for many years in an organization, in a network, international network called the Campaign for Wages for Housework. And when we campaigned for it, and we spoke to women, not academicians, but we spoke to women about the fact, what is housework? Housework, domestic work, it's really not a personal service to your children, to your husband, but it's production of living labor or labor power, however you want to call it. I don't believe that the difference is so powerful. But then, therefore, this old world of products that we see around us, was also the result of their contribution, because generally, traditionally, it has been women in the home who have produced the producers. Once you say, we produce the producers, and therefore there wouldn't be bridges, there wouldn't be cars, there wouldn't be the world of commodities that we see, the world of wealth, right? And the presumption there is always the male world, or the male white wage world that produced the capital's wealth. Then immediately it was a tremendous enthusiasm, because first of all, I think women have always known in their heart that their work was important, but also not only important for the reproduction of their family, but also important from the point of view, right, of who creates the social wealth. Who creates the social wealth? I think that this issue still is at the core and is central to the question of value creation. You want to show, you know, Marx said, being a productive worker, it's not something to be proud of, it's a misfortune. Being a productive worker means you've been well exploited, means you're a subject of exploitation. So there's nothing to celebrate. So the attempt to show that, oh yeah, wages for housework is productive, oh, this is value creation, has nothing to do with making a moral claim, right? It has to do making a claim on the wealth. It's making a claim on the wealth that capitalism, the capitalist class, had accumulated, also at our expenses. This is the core. This is the politics. This is the political value of the issue of value creation. It's because with that we can make a claim, right? Obviously, as we heard very, very often in the debate surrounding the basic guaranteed income, you know, we should have a right to live, particularly in a society where the dominant system has appropriated all the means of reproduction. We should make a claim that we have a right to live independently of whether we work or not, because in any case, even exploitative work is not available. But I think it remains useful politically to be able to make that claim, to be able to say, no, yes, all of this that is always attributed to capitalist innovation, creativity, and so forth, is in fact the production of a world of workers in which we also are present, in which women across the world are also present. And of course today, with the globalization of the economy, you know, that process of production has become extremely much more complicated, and the process of reproduction has become much more complicated. And I'm really very happy for the contribution and the work that people like Alessandra Mezzadri has made, and Claire Quintin, that are making to actually, you know, throw light on you know, all those connections, all those networks, all those relations, because we need to have that information, and we need to be also able to bring out, you know, the material basis for our solidarity, because our solidarity has a material basis, We're deeply linked in every moment, in every aspect of our life, to workers across the world. And even if we begin with examining our daily life, examining what we eat, examining what we use, examining the condition for the digital instruments and transport mechanism that we use, we'll find ourselves connected with a whole network of people with whom we need to struggle. Starting from our locality. Because, and here I want to just make a direct connection to what we said before, Claire. The struggle is not only in terms of the taxation of the international corporation, though that is very important, of course. These are the great robbers, the big robbers. But it's important not to lose sight of the fact that there is a tremendous struggle. If we could see now from you know, a bird's eye what is taking place across the world, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, we would see that in every village there is a struggle. And the struggle also has to do with appropriation of land, reappropriation of water, has to do with opposing the coming of a mine. There is a bloody struggle everywhere. where people are directly reclaiming the wealth, right? So as important as it might be to begin those kind of international pressuring of corporations and states, it's also important not to lose sight of the fact that already on the ground there is a tremendous struggle, and I would say the struggle over social reproduction that is taking place across the world today, particularly the struggle over land, waters, seeds, making seed bank, opposing transgenic seeds and so on, is likely the most important struggle on earth. If were that struggle lost, we would be in a very, very difficult position to be able to oppose any form of exploitation. We can actually be able to resist the exploitation that is coming from every side of society, and also beyond resisting. We can actually think of creating a different society precisely because the struggles are there. And those struggles already have within themselves, right, the embryo of a new society. But going back to my original thinking, primitive accumulation, I think is very important to place the discussion of social reproduction within the context of primitive accumulation, right? Primitive accumulation, as we know, being the term that was used by Marx, and before Marx, Adam Smith, right, to describe the first phase of capitalist development, and that phase that creates the condition of existence of capitalism. And it's a phase that, as we know, consisted of processes like the expulsion of the peasantry from the land, the conquest of what we call now America, and I've also the slave trade, the creation of plantation economy, and I've added to that description, I've added also a whole attack on the social power of women and the creation of a whole regime of disciplining of women with the appropriation of women's body by the state and so forth, implemented particularly through the Great Witch Hunts that took place in Europe and also in America. And I have to say that I'm now in a project, especially in Europe, which I hope to extend also to Latin America, with women. Now it's concretizing, especially in Spain, of revisiting the witch hunt in a very concrete way, going to the archives, taking out stories, because it's a process that has been cancelled from history. Very few historians have dealt with it, and in particular, it does not exist at a popular level. Most women don't have an idea what happened, even though thousands and thousands of women were killed in the most brutal way, were tortured. Nevertheless, that old memory has been completely erased. So we have begun a project of reappropriating from below, rewriting history from below and appropriating the history, and trying to understand what it meant in terms of the developing capitalist economy, and seeing what we learned from that process in terms of what is happening today. Because I believe there is an important connection. Because today there are still witch hunts, particularly in Africa, in India, parts of Asia, I think is expanding to Latin America. Formal witch hunt. Women have been accused of being witches and been killed, buried alive or burnt and so forth, and informal way. Because there is an increasing violence across the world against women that is directly connected, I think it can be shown, to the new processes of globalization. So going back to the question of primitive accumulation is very important, and reading today's capitalism and today's issue of social reproduction through the category of primitive accumulation, I think is very, very, very important for a number of reasons. Number one, because it shows, right, we live in a system that after having exploited ecologically, politically, in terms of the destruction of human life and exploitation of human life, after more than 500 years of that, we have a system that still argues that they cannot provide, cannot guarantee the life of the majority of the population. I think that this is something, when we speak of social reproduction, there should be the first issue upon which to meditate profoundly. Because I think it shows that the capitalist system is not sustainable. That we have a system that is not sustainable, number one. Number two, that we cannot rely, right, on the hope that capitalism is going to better, is going to develop a human face, can be democratized. We have a 500 years record now. So we talk about social reproduction. To this day, we have a system that has exploited the world more and more, every corner of the world, as marketized, privatized, dominated every aspect of our life and nature and our own bodies, and nevertheless is not able to guarantee, right, the well-being, the reproduction, the prosperity of the majority of the population of the world. I think this is very important. It's also very important to realize that this is not going to likely change, and that's why I see a big difficulty. Scale, we realize that the relative prosperity that the capitalist class has granted, to certain sectors of the population, for example, in Europe after World War II, the so-called welfare state has been a very, very limited program, very, very limited program that has coexisting with colonialism, has coexisting with the brutal exploitation of much of the world. And the moment in which in the 60s and 70s you have a whole cycle of struggle that begins to challenge even the limits of those welfare programs and the limits of those jobs, what those jobs, the secure jobs, the 9-to-5 seem to guarantee. We saw that immediately a counter-revolution has begun. And this counter-revolution is, what we call globalization, neoliberalism. Now, this has clearly produced a major transformation in the organization of reproductive work. And today we see across the world, that the reproduction that takes place on a domestic level, right, has been significantly reduced. Which is one of the reasons why we have such a crisis of reproduction across the world. I think that one of the most important signals has been the massive migration of women. Traditionally, men have migrated. The massive migration of women is an expression of the drastic reduction of reproductive work, across many world regions. And in every area in which we see, the discussion, your work on factory workers in Senegal, right? The work that Alessandra, has done on Indian women, the fact that in every village now, in every village in Latin America or Africa, you find now small factories in which women are working. It's another added signal about the fact that the whole reproductive sector is being disinvested. And that in fact, what is important is nothing has compensated for it. So that much of the time, of women's life is spent outside of the home. But that work of reproduction that used to be done in the home is not being replaced. Is not being replaced. And this is definitely part of a tremendous crisis that we're witnessing today, and not only in Africa or in India or in the Philippines, where many, many women have migrated, either to maquila type of work, right, which is the new plantations, those factories where women work now. These are the new version of the plantation system, because they are totally enslaving, or they are migrating abroad to do domestic work in other countries. Right? But we also see that in the United States. We see that in Europe, that the time, energy, possibility, resources that people have for reproduction is continuously decreasing. And this is why, and maybe I will conclude here, to me the question of reproduction remains the question of the reappropriation of resources, as well, of course, as the reorganization of how this work is done. And the two are very intimately connected. No? Are intimately connected because, as I've been observing in many of my contexts, particularly with women in Latin America, the ability to reorganize reproductive work on a daily basis, on a more cooperative level, right, on a more commoning basis, and creating, a new social fabric from below. It's also fundamental in the capacity that women have to start a process of reappropriation. Reappropriation of territory, land, for those who are expelled from the rural area, so that you have a place where you can build your house, where you can build some street, where you can build some facilities, some services, and the ability to confront the state not alone, and to confront the state from a position of greater solidarity and greater unity in the communities, and hopefully beyond those communities, I think is fundamental in the process of, start that reappropriation that we need to do, and start that process of transition to a society based to a very, very different concept of value that is not capitalist value. Capitalist value is congealed human labor. Capitalist value is our blood. Capitalist value is our life, that today is in their hands. And a question of social reproduction today is how we take it out of their hands and we reproduce it for ourselves and our communities. Thank you.